Welcome to Discover the Difference. I'm your host, Jamie Reed, alongside my buddy, Gabriel Earl. And today we have on Scott Mason. Scott is one of the most absolutely energetic, driven people I have ever met. He's put on this planet to help people discover their sense of purpose. But the most interesting part is it was born out of a story of alienation, parents that put him into a biracial upbringing in the Midwest via Topeka, Kansas, as a gentleman who battled with how to come out as being gay. And all of that fueled who he is today and how he creates connectivity and helping people discover their purpose in life, whether it be professionally or what they do in their own time. Enjoy the show. Scott Mason, folks. All right, sitting here with Scott Mason. Scott, you were introduced to us by Von Le Demone, a lady that was introduced in our lives and became instant best friends. I think maybe you had the same experience with her as we did, but we find it interesting, and there's some commonalities in things that you both had to overcome. Her family comes to the United States as refugees from Vietnam and had to find their way, and you have a very interesting background that a lot of challenges that you overcame to create what is now a lot of success in your life. And I just would like to open up, if you could give the audience a background on who you are and shed some light on some of those early challenges you faced.
Yeah, thank you for asking. First of all, in terms of who I am always forward thinking. And one of the things that I feel like we have in common is an understanding of the nature of what that forward thinking mentality is like within me, at least. And that is about the importance of connection. I really pride myself and view at my core the ethos of creating community and connection between people, meaningful connection. And so that's the one sentence answer to your first question. But it comes from having a history of alienation. I was born in England to a British woman who was in graduate school studying foreign languages. She had, being honest with you all, an affair with a man who was in law school studying. He was from Trinidad, and out popped me. And in that time and place, and at that age and stage in their lives, just raising a child wasn't going to happen. So I was put up for adoption. I was adopted by a couple of African Americans, a man who was ultimately ended up being a civil servant in Kansas, and a woman who worked in a dog food factory. And they moved me to Topeka, Kansas, outside of that town. And I grew up biracial child, adopted by two African Americans, and in a milieu that was not anywhere near the norm. Very conservative milieu, very isolating milieu. And it was a milieu in which there was not a lot of expectation put upon people that grew up there, particularly those that might have come from a more working class or blue collar sort of background, particularly African American. And ultimately, I always tell folks, I would go running for hours in the wheat fields. But at night, I'd look up at the stars and I'd dream about how it just had to be more out there for me. And so began the journey to create that reality for myself.
Where does that come from? That internal fire or feeling? Because you came from a place of feeling alienated and different and out of place. In the middle of the Midwest and in that environment. What is it that drove you to this today of having this view of forward thinking?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was the fact that there was an internal contradiction. I actually did believe somewhere inside that I had the capacity to be more than what was expected of me. There was also a little bit of a stubborn streak. I took speech and debate when I was in high school. And remember that this was being said about a child that was biracial, it's half Black, in a school environment that was overwhelmingly white. My debate / speech teacher decided to tell me in front of my entire class, Scott, you can teach about me. Scott, you can teach a monkey how to talk, but you can't teach him how to think. The stubborn person inside was reactive. Yeah, I'm going to prove to the world that I can think. Yeah, I can prove to the world that you might not expect me to be anything other than just someone that's working. Not that there's anything wrong with these. These are honorable jobs that might be capable of working in nothing more than a menial position in some mall somewhere. But I believe I'm capable of more. Not only that, but alienation ultimately began to have me realize that in order to feel the sense of connection with other human beings that I craved, I had to begin to look elsewhere. I came out as LGBT when I was a teenager. Biracial, son of African-American people in an overwhelmingly white religious background who then also ends up being LGBT. If I was going to have a social life at all, I had to be able to leave. I couldn't imagine staying there anymore. I would imagine when I looked up at the stars dreaming about this world, a city where I could be myself, where there were actually other people like me, even just one other person. And that ultimately is what began to give me a drive that accelerated over time.
Oh, wow. So Topeka, Kansas, we talked about it before the podcast, is close to where I grew up. It is a very conservative area. Other than running through the wheat fields and staring at the stars, was speech a gateway to create connection, or what was being in speech and debate that served a purpose for you?
If there was one gift that I had that people seemed loath to deny existed, it was my ability to present verbally. I later came to understand speech as an act of creation. You know, it says in some ancient religious texts that the universe itself was created via the word. What that is, whether you believe that particular story or not, is it an acknowledgement of the creative power of speech. The beauty of being alienated and having no one around me that looked like me or had my background or was relatable to me in any meaningful way was that it opened enormous possibilities for creation. And so since I was given a natural ability to be able to vocalize in a way that commanded attention, that seemed to be the possibility, the avenue that could lead me to a better future for myself. And I was going to take it.
From the second he came on, I'm like, Tony Robbins has to be this guy's dad. I mean, you kind of look, sound, present, project. I'm like, you have to be told that many times, right?
You can tell me as many times as you want. I never tire of hearing
it. So this idea of alienation as a motivation to look outside your circumstances. Was there anybody in your childhood or along that way that supported you through that, or was that just something totally ingrained on you and you just made it happen?
I have never been asked that question before, and I actually thank you for asking that. There were occasional teachers that I had that saw something in me. I remember one wrote on my 7th grade English class report card, Scott walks in there and he smiles and he lights up the room. And I remember she pulled me aside one time and she said, Scott, some of these people that you're hanging out with and having fun with, they're the wrong crowd. You have so much potential. You're going to end up walking down a bad path. Now, of course, as a preteen / early teenage boy, I wasn't going to let that stop me. All I did was drive me deeper and deeper into the wrong crowd. But still, as much as I might have resisted her words because it made me seem less cool, I was at the same time hearing what she was saying, that there was potential there. Later in my career, I was told once by a boss that I had, when I was griping to him about the lack of mentors that I was getting in the large organization that I worked for. I was like, people are getting these mentors and they're getting all of these career opportunities. I'm having to struggle for every single thing that I do. He said, Scott, it will never happen for you. You will not have a mentor. You're just not going to get it. Sorry, you need to deal with it. And he gave me a way to deal with that. the reason why that was so impactful for me was that I had understood early on the impact or the power of someone simply saying, I care about you and believe in you.
That's cool. That was a good question. That was a good answer too. So along those lines, what was the relationship like with your parents growing up, and as you came out and discovered more who you were?
It was a challenge. They were concerned about a number of different things. First of all, they were concerned that the community that I was in would reject me. And they were also concerned at that time about AIDS. There was an association of gay men with AIDS. I never had it or put myself in a position where I would get it, because by the time I came out of the closet, there was an understanding of how to protect oneself against that. But they were not particularly well educated about that. Being really candid with you, they also told me that was they believed that was the influence of white people on me, and they saw that as a very, very negative thing. They were concerned about how people would treat them. We had a minister at the church we went to who, I mean, never forget, called us all down to the altar one day and went on a thunderous sermon about Sodom and Gomorrah and women turning into pillars of salt and people incinerating and all of this sort of stuff. And this hell imagery was, as you can imagine, very, very vivid and very powerful for someone that was emerging in this environment, and this concern, oh my gosh, am I going to go to hell? Is this really me? Stereotyping in the media, all of this sort of stuff was a challenge. So I would be lying if I were to say that in that milieu, without real supports, not just for me, but for families that were similarly situated to my parents, it made their job of parenting harder, and it made that sense of alienation and severance of a connection within the family all the more risky at all times.
Have you guys worked through that? Have you been able to overcome it over time, or?
It never truly gets better. We have talked about it. We have worked through it. They have come a long way. I think that, people's ability to deal with disappointment, what they might want, what opportunities they may have imagined for themselves and for their children, can vary over time. I will say that they acknowledge that the relationship that I've been in for the past 23 plus years at this point is a stable one. They acknowledge that he genuinely cares about me. They acknowledge he ain't going anywhere. And are they the sort of folks that are ever going to truly be out there saying, my son is gay and I am proud, and marching in the streets? I think that would be a lot to ask. I do consider it a huge victory when a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago at this point, there were anti-gay marriage initiatives going on in Kansas. And they were talking to me at length about how frustrated and angry they were with the people in their community who were so gung-ho behind stopping LGBT people from having marriage equality. They clearly had a personal stake in it at that point, and that showed tremendous growth. Look, there are people that are in their 80s now. Even then, they were in their late 60s and early 70s in a conservative environment. The human capacity to grow is not endless, but it nevertheless can always exceed our expectations. And anytime it exceeds expectations, to me, that is a beautiful thing.
That's awesome. Well, one of the things that, that it seems like a theme here is this, idea of justice and equality. Is that what drove you into the law, or what was it that got you to Columbia and, say, hey, I want to be a lawyer?
Some of it was justice, and some of it was an interest in public policy. And a law degree is a way to credentialize yourself across a broad range of potential long-term career options, including public policy. How things happen in an urban environment, the leadership around social problems that cities can engage in, and the changes and transformations across the entire spectrum of cultural variables is something that I found very, very exciting, intellectually stimulating, and law school uniquely positioned me to be able to handle. The other thing, I'm going to keep it real with y'all too. I had a literature major and I couldn't do math.
There you go. But it sounds like affecting change you were thinking through public policy, was a potential avenue and a law degree would serve that. Is that fair to say?
Very fair.
Well, what about to somebody who's there today? Like what other avenue would a younger version of yourself be able to take now?
It is amazing how, if you think about the general nature of a law degree, the possibilities that it can open for you. If you are able to, as an attorney, pull yourself beyond the micro thinking that it can sometimes encourage. What does the word blah, blah, blah say in this contract? Or what is statutory provision, blah, 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 blah. Thinking super narrowly and technically, which some people enjoy and is definitely an element of the practice of law. If you're able to, though, move beyond that and think about things like policy, or think about even something as tied into day-to-day practice as litigation strategy or negotiation strategy. Once your mind moves beyond the purely tactical and technical and expresses itself into the strategic, literally the world becomes your oyster. What is leadership across the board? In business, in any sort of organization, even within your local community groups, it is about strategy development, visioning, and execution. And law can give you the intellectual tools to do that. Not only that, as annoying as it was taking law classes, and I won't lie, it was irritating. I have to say, the heft of that credential, the gravity, is worth it. You learn how to think through things logically and rationally and present them that way. You also think about counter arguments and potential downsides of situations that you might be in a way that other disciplines might not put you through the ringer through as much. And so you have that along with the ability to think strategically if you so choose. And then leadership itself becomes an amazing set of opportunities. It's no coincidence that many political leaders are lawyers, that you find lawyers in leadership positions in areas as diverse as tech, healthcare, or any other number of businesses. It's because the leadership skill set, which is separate and apart from other technical skill sets, is one that is so highly transferable. So valuable. It's one of the hugest ROIs that you can have if you so choose to utilize it that way.
He's going to have an alternative career and being like the face of Columbia Law School or something, because that was the sexiest like description of why to get in law I've ever heard. Because law to me sounds nothing like connecting to people or anything he just said. But when you glamorize it like that, I mean, I want to go to law school now.
Yeah, can you work on that for insurance for us? That same speech.
You know what? I bet I can find a way to even sell insurance as sexy. Absolutely. We'll just talk about it.
So then you have a very successful podcast, Purpose Highway.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and what was the genesis of that, and what are some of the things that you really focus on in your Purpose Highway?
Let me pull back a bit to explain the genesis of that. After practicing law for many years, I co-owned a manufacturing company. And my business partner and we had 50-50 ownership arrangement, ultimately decided that we had different visions for the future of that company and that he should maintain the company, and that due to a diverse professional history that I had before being involved with that company, I should move on to do other things and be more aligned with who I was. And part of what I felt I wanted to do in that next leg of my journey was figure out exactly why I was given the gifts that I was given on this planet and how they could be optimized in a way that would truly be of the benefit to the greatest number of people. It all, at the end of the day, came back to the gift of speaking, oratory, and building connection. The podcast originally was themed around the idea of connecting people or interviewing people and creating a community around those interviews of people who had connected to a higher purpose to build a better self and and I say that and underline and bold, a better world. And some of that was because it was something I was experiencing myself and had gone through the transformative power of understanding, well, what was I given my gifts for? What is the related purpose to that, and how can I share that? And so I interviewed a lot of people that had really gone through transformations in their lives, finding their purpose and then doing something that impacted others beyond it. However, over time, that shifted as I began to really think about some of the messages that I was hearing within the subtext of the various guests that I was interviewing. Where was my questioning going? What was my sense of purpose driving me to? And what was the possible distinctive voice that my podcast could bring into the podcasting world? I began to think about some larger social currents. I tell people right now that the podcast is talking about a profound transformation in our society. We are going through what I call a silent revolution. People aren't talking about it, but it is a revolution of thought that is as profound as any that has occurred in the entire history and prehistory of humanity. And that is a reframing of how we think about purpose, ethics, and spirituality. A lot of the historical institutions that have driven our thinking around meaning and connected us through that search for meaning are in decline. That includes houses of worship, but it also includes a lot of the institutions that have historically garnered high levels of civic engagement. Alongside this silent revolution of thinking and of our connection to each other is a secret plague of alienation. Because without these historic places to connect with each other through the search for meaning, the sense of relationship that we crave as human beings is not met. The need for us to each find meaning, it ain't going anywhere. So where are people going? What are new movements for connection through the search of meaning? And so I'm talking to people that study this phenomenon from an academic perspective. I'm talking to individuals whose lives have gone through profound transformations that have led them down an unusual, ethical, purpose-driven, or spiritually related path. And I am talking to those that are creating new movements for connecting people through the search for meaning via purpose, spirituality, and ethics, and where those pathways may be taking them. I believe that the future of thought is beginning now. And I'm excited to be on the vanguard of exposing people and creating community around what that thought might be.
So,
Oh, wow.
that's a lot to think about that you just said right there. But if somebody's listening to this podcast and they either have a job or they're running a company or doing something, and then they're thinking to themselves, I don't know if I connect with what he just said, if I have purpose or meaning or connectedness, like where does somebody start with that?
Yeah. Actually, I would begin to think about it almost with a sense of formula. Well, first of all, before I even get to formulas, all of us were given a purpose. All of us. If you are doubting what your purpose is, or if you say, I want to find my purpose, the first thing to acknowledge and to cement in your mind is the embedded understanding that you have one. Next, think about purpose almost from an ethical perspective, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. I believe that purpose is tied to the gifts that we have had, the experiences that we have been given, and service to others. The formula that I posit to people is experience plus gifts, in parentheses, times service. If we can tie the experiences that we've had in life to the gifts that we have been given, connect it to some sort of service, how can those things help others? You begin to have the pathway to purpose. Purpose is always rooted in service. Now, I want to talk a little bit about ethics, because it can be easy for people to hear that formula, to write it down, to think about it, and then do nothing with it. And this is why I think that we have to do something about it. The gifts and the experience that we've been given, I analogize to bars of gold on a silver platter that have been given to us by none other than the universe itself. And if we are given experiences and gifts, all of which are unique to us, and turn it away, we are doing nothing less than laughing in the face of providence. We are telling the universe itself, no. And I argue that that is unethical. I'm radical about that. These things were given to us for a meaning. So it is up to us. It is an ethical imperative to figure out what those things are, tie it to service, and move. This planet is facing challenges unlike we have ever faced, not just in our lifetimes, but as a species. We need people connected to their purpose to make it through.
That's awesome. This idea of connection obviously is a gift that you have, and connecting with people and making relationships. I'm curious, where do you feel like that's come from, or is that just innate? And is that something that you can improve on, or something that you can grow into for people that are, looking for the ingredients to get better at connecting?
All of us seek connection. Now, there may be varying degrees, and I don't want to say that with 100%. Obviously, there are inevitably outliers that want to go live in a forest somewhere. But even they ultimately, usually in one way or another, rely on some sort of connection with something, even if it's a connection with the animal that they kill to eat. But most of us choose to live within a society, and so there is an interdependency that is essential to that. Even if we are not necessarily in our hearts predispositioned to be highly empathetic or to highly connect with people, intellectually, we know that we need that connection. Being aware of the fact that we have to be able to connect with people, not living in any myth about total independence, is the first step, I believe, that we should take in order to begin to connect with people. Understanding and having it as a self-disciplined practice to remember it ain't all about you. The best way that you can connect with people is simply by asking them about themselves, listening, and shutting up. There is no requirement that we say our opinion about everything all the time. No one says that. And if there's anything I've learned over time, you can build a huge amount of connection with people simply by choosing to say nothing and just listen. Everyone likes to be heard. So if we acknowledge that people have voices, that the act of speech is an act of self-creation, and that everyone wants to self-create in this universe, we already have a stepping stone towards connection. I will also say one other thing. I am a firm believer in what I call the leadership hack of an empathy reel. And what that is as a matter of practice, when you interact with people, as you're talking to them, or maybe after the fact, replay it in your mind, almost like a little film reel. But imagine that you are watching that reel, not through your eyes, but through the eyes of another. If you watch it through the eyes of those that you speak to, how are they hearing your voice? What are they thinking of your facial expressions? What about your body language? If you are able to honestly imagine how they view you, if you play that empathy reel, write down how you came across generally, and what you could do better, and what you should do more of. Those sorts of steps, even if you might not necessarily be feeling naturally that sense of connection with people, can help you build the interpersonal skills that you need to connect with others.
Is that, that example, is that what you did with your parents? Kind of, it sounded like from the beginning when you talked about them and you did an empathy hack on their experience towards you.
I've learned to. I will be honest, at first I was just angry or indignant or all these other things. Part of my journey has been reframing my own life and experiences so that I can be able to see more through the eyes of others. There have been many, many times on my own journey in which I have miserably failed. And by the way, almost always in one way or another paid a consequence, even if it was diminishment of my own spirit.
Well, did you have to do the empathy reel in the eyes of your parents to be able to connect to that or understand that?
I believe, yes, I had to, because I think about it as we talked about earlier. What was it like being an African-American family in an overwhelmingly white community? That is one that did not always treat African-Americans well. Shortly after we moved into our neighborhood, a neighborhood boy just came up to my sister one day and used the N-word to describe her to her face. These sorts of things can create an enormous amount of pressure on a family. They want to succeed. They were in an era where there are all sorts of stereotypes about African Americans and what they're capable of, how they act. And of course, they were going to want to have what they perceive to be the best foot forward. While I'm caught up in my own sense of injury around their feelings toward me, in order to really take responsibility for the relationship, move towards having it have some semblance of normalcy, I had to be able to be empathetic. I had to understand that there's two sides of the story. Especially, by the way, if I wanted to get people to be more open-minded about what it was like as an LGBT person, for them to be more empathetic towards me, how could I ask other people to be that way and not expect to do that myself? It's the height of hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. Hypocrisy severs connection.
I think it's funny because when Vun was on, she said some things that connected with our business, how we operate as a company, and she used divergent thinking, which is a core value. But what you just said about empathy and connectedness, I feel like that's like a lesson in sales. You're talking about it in purpose context, highly relevant there, but it's also, when we speak to a business audience in our own organization, the number one thing that people lack is empathy. They're in such a rush to speak about whatever they're there for that they don't take the time to connect with people, really hear from them. Gabe's great at it, but when we bring these people in, who don't have those skills, and we're trying to teach it to them, for somebody that it just naturally doesn't have that curiosity or want to look through that lens, hasn't been on the journey you did to discover it, how do you help instill that in somebody to where they want to approach situations either empathetically or with a purpose of connecting to the other person?
Yeah. It's interesting that you raise the sales environment in response to the earlier part of this discussion. That manufacturing company that I co-owned, it was a apparel printing company. One of my core responsibilities was business development and overseeing sales. And one of the worst memories I have about myself was a very well-known art institute that had been a long-term client of ours, and they had a project that they wanted to work with us on. And they came to our shop where I walked them through the whole process that we had, explained pricing, all of that. Then I had all these ideas for ways that we could help them. And I saw this look on her face. And she said, this is all interesting. I knew it all, and it's not what I'm here to talk to you about. Wow. Now, I'm really grateful that she said that. I prided myself on being someone that listened, but I had let myself get into a rut where I thought I knew what the customers wanted. They always did kind of want the same thing, but in this case, that wasn't true. And I had not taken the time to do exactly what I just told you to do. Shut up and listen. Once I did that, we had an amazing conversation, and I was able to rebuild some credibility. And I think that credibility goes as to how you might approach, or how those that might be challenged around having a sense of connection can begin to approach it and understand the importance of it. We only can develop relationships and certainly sell if we have credibility with the prospect. I have never in my life met someone who says, that person has no credibility. They are a complete farce and a joke. I don't believe a word that comes out of their mouth. I don't trust them in the least. So let me give them tons of money. Do you? I don't do that. And if there are people that do that, please have them call me, because I would just love to take their money, and I'll just say any old thing out of my head and just take money. Most people, though, at least to their conscious mind, want to believe that the person that they're giving money to has some credibility, isn't a complete joke of a human being. And so in order to establish credibility, you have to have connection. People also generally in the sales world do not say, oh my God, that person abused me. They were a total jerk. I feel like dirt. I'll take my money to them as opposed to the person who makes me feel great. I don't like spending money with people who make me feel wonderful. Again, doesn't happen. And so thinking about those sorts of things means that if we want to have that credibility, if we want to position ourselves to be able to encourage people to spend money with us, we simply have to, HAVE, underline, bold, all caps, develop the skill of building connection. There are entire books that are out there around building connection and how to do that. We practice these things at networking groups if you choose to really listen to and observe how this occurs. The other part of this, though, is, of course, and I'm sure you all know this more than anything, ego. You want to sell, you're going to have to let the ego go sometimes. We have to be willing to say that we learn. As much as perhaps connecting with people is a natural ability for me, even more so, I've invested massive amounts of time and continue to do so, and hopefully I will until the day I die, in developing that skill, building it up.
So what's your favorite book on the subject?
The Frog and the Prince. And I like it because it uses that fairy tale of the prince, or I believe it's the Frog and the Prince, about the princess or the woman kissing a zillion frogs until she finds a prince. And it basically says bluntly, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs, which means you have to be open for a lot, and you have to be willing to listen and hear. You won't know who that prince is right up front until you've done a lot of kissing. But you can't ever discount people, because that person that you might discount might be the prince. I was at a networking group once, and as you all know, because this came up earlier in the conversation, I was an attorney for many years, and I always had a small little group of clients that they're usually small businesses that I would give advice to and have on retainer, help them out. And when I joined this networking group, that was when I first began to work with this manufacturing company. I needed to offload my clients to someone who could give them the appropriate level of attention as I was focusing on a different venture. And there was a small business attorney in the group. So I said, oh, I work with this company. Here's my card. I'd love to talk to you about some things. She said, politely in front of the president of this networking group, yes, I will. But she canceled on me 3 times. Every time I would go to the set meeting place on the date that we were there, oh, I'm too busy to meet you today. Let's schedule again. And that happened over and over again. Finally, she said, Scott, I'm just too busy. I don't have time for you. And I said, oh, okay. Too bad. I had a client that was looking for a female small business attorney, and I was thinking about referring them to you, but okay, I'll take that referral elsewhere. All of a sudden, I got an urgent call. Oh, wait, I can reschedule my entire day today. I'm on a bus, but I'll be at a meeting within, a half an hour. Just wait for me. I'll be there. I really do have the time. If she had kissed the frog, she might have found the prince.
I like that.
Well, let's go back to Purpose Highway for a second. Obviously, we've started a podcast and understand. I mean, there's a little bit of anxiety for me in getting going in this world. It's something new and different. You have a whole nother level of ability to articulate and speak. What was it like for you to start? If somebody else is listening who wants to start a podcast, what's the advice you have to give them? And how'd you do it?
First of all, don't underestimate your own ability to build connection on this show, because y'all are good at it. So I might say to people, watch y'all, because you all are doing it very, very well. I
All right,
would
we're gonna buy from him now.
Yeah.
We're
What do you-
we're
what do you
buying
want
from
us
you.
to buy, Scott?
You're
What'd
making
you
us feel
say?
good. We're gonna buy from you. You're making us feel good.
Hey, life is too short not to make other people feel good, in all seriousness, too. Really just dive in and do it, and understand that what we're talking about today, and think about the same skills, particularly if you're in business development or in sales, or if you are in an organization and in a role in which you have to sell an idea. You're working for the government and you have to sell a public policy proposal. If you're working for an accounting firm and you want to bring in a new software program to manage your customers, all of those involve selling ideas. Those are the skill sets that you bring to the table as a podcaster. It's really just about building connection. And once you allow that to happen, the space for guests to come and open up will occur and the audience will follow, so long as you're consistent.
So can you give us an example of one of your podcasts that just blew you away? One of your, you had one and you're like, wow, this one really made me think.
Yes. It was just last week. I taped it about a month ago, and it was scheduled all along for release last week. And I say last week for a reason that will become apparent in a moment. It was an interview with a man who was born in Afghanistan and raised as a child during the Soviet invasion. He was there when they evacuated and there were domestic wars and the Taliban took over. He talked at length about what it was like when the Taliban took over, what it was like for female politicians like his mother, facing this sort of repressive regime, what it was like having compulsory extreme religiosity put on you. He talked about his family's desperate attempt to escape when Kabul, his hometown, was being bombed to smithereens. Literally, there's this story of a last ditch trek that they make through the mountains, just holding out any hope that they can leave. He finally did escape. What that meant, having lived through something like that, for his sense of spirituality. In fact, this episode was so intense, and he later talks about his own journey into alternative spirituality and how he was able to reconcile this intense grudge he had against institutional religion growing up in the most repressive one probably that there is, and how he began to be able to find a spirituality and a space of connection with something bigger than himself, all on his own terms. And so this episode ended up being released 4 days after the Taliban retook Afghanistan. And I was blown away. I listened to it again in light of all of that. It's jaw-dropping. And it's a story we all saw in the newspaper when the Taliban retook these photos of people crawling onto airplanes. We saw that photo of 600 Afghanis with nothing but clothes on their back, looking to get away and build a life for themselves and not stay there and face the horrors that they had lived through below. Who can't feel that? But it's one thing to see that and turn the newspaper page and move on to the next thing. It's another thing to spend 40 minutes with a man talking about his life, being a child, living in that sort of environment. My jaw hit the floor with his openness. He's still traumatized to this day. He was courageous and let it show. And that is the power of podcasting. And that is the sort of thing that I hope you all experience. In fact, I'm sure you will, and that your audience gets to experience with you.
Who is this person and what is he doing today?
Amazing story. His name is Hamid Murad. He is a wealth manager. He was one of the first two, I believe, people from Afghanistan to ever study in England. So he was a groundbreaker. And his journey was one in which he basically responded to this extremely repressive, compulsory religious environment by becoming totally just concerned with nothing but parties and dance music and money. And then over time, he felt a pull of something else. He became later involved in a mystical form of Islam after a very extensive spiritual journey. And he had literally an epiphany, a transcendent experience that made him understand that this was right for him. He reached out to his wealth management clients and told them I'm going to be using the principles of this mystical sect that I'm involved in my management of your wealth, and lost 95% of his clients in a week. Or at least he never heard from them again. However, the 5% that stayed with him,
It's like
he
Jerry
rebuilt his
Maguire.
life, and it's unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's what Jerry Maguire did. And then,
Yeah.
what's the Buddhist? I know you follow him as well. That does the motivational speaking, and he started in England under the same context of partying and all that, and then left to become a monk. I can't think of his name. You and Tammy follow him.
Oh, he wrote "Think Like a Monk."
Yes, of course. I know that. I'm blanking on the name too. I know exactly who that is, of course.
It's kind of like a combination of backgrounds between them. Yeah, that's so interesting. Awesome. Well, have you had in your show's experience, have you had a podcast not go the way you wanted it to, or
Yes.
thought it would, or a bad experience?
Yes.
And what
I
was
have
that
had-
like?
Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead to finish. I'm sorry.
And what was it like?
A wake-up call. I have had to junk some episodes. I will not lie about that. At the end of the day, I'm about serving the audience and building a community. And if the episode is not fit for air, then it's up to me to either find a way to edit it so that the guest looks good, but most importantly, the audience has a message that's meaningful, or to not release that. And so in those situations, I've made the choice to simply not release the episode. It does not help my connection with that guest, but it's always about the bigger connection that I'm looking at, and the bigger sense of feeling that I want those in my audience to experience. And so there's that situation. And then there are situations in which the guest, just there may be technical issues, or there may be some other thing that goes on. One time very early on, I forgot to press the record button, so I had to do the whole thing all over again. Yeah, I did it. I'll confess. But those experiences are how we learn, and it gets better and better. One thing that I will say for new podcasters in particular, there was also a period during the first season of my show where I began to feel really burnt out, and I was dreading the recordings and viewing it as a chore. I realized that was a different sort of wake-up call. It meant I needed to refine the theme. I needed to reinvigorate. I needed to think through what I was doing and why. And that's ultimately what led me to close out that first season and begin to re-envision the show with the theme that I mentioned to you earlier about the silent revolution and the secret plague. And then suddenly I was energized. And not only that, but suddenly, and it is very bizarre, but the right guests that are hyper engaging literally just seem to pop out of nowhere. And they told me, and I've gotten this feedback consistently since making that shift, that I'm hyper engaged as a host, which we need to take responsibility for as hosts and bring that level of engagement so that that interplay between the host and the guest can happen, and the show can pop.
So besides the podcasting, I know you're doing a lot of leadership coaching and mentoring.
Yep.
Is that how, I know, besides the business aspect, is that part of how you're giving back? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I really think that being able to, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I heard earlier in my career that was most painful was, Scott, you're not going to get a mentor. It will never happen for you. Now, the person who told me that ultimately said, what I recommend that you do, Scott, since you're not ever going to get one, is become your own mentor. And that was some of the best advice I've ever received. I am my own mentor. I literally put together a curriculum every year of things that I need to read and things I need to learn, or things that I want to learn, and then try and follow that so that I'm continually growing from people who are much more knowledgeable, wise, and experienced than I am. That being said, it also hurt. And so I've made a commitment to be there for people who might not otherwise have mentors. With regards to leadership and with regards to the core range of business sets that an entrepreneur needs to have outside of what their subject matter expertise is, those are areas where people often are left swimming in the middle of very rocky oceans. So if I'm there providing them with services that can help deepen those leadership skills, deepen those executive skills, and give them substantive knowledge about the full range of skill sets they need to have in order to effectively help a company grow or to go wherever they want to in their life, I am proud to do it. And I hope that every single one of them succeeds far beyond me. That will show that the effort that I put in with them and the time that they chose to spend with me, which by the way, I consider a privilege, will have been worth it.
I have one more question, then maybe we go to rapid fire.
Sounds good.
Did Phil tell you there's a rapid fire section?
No, I don't think he did. Maybe
All right,
he did.
all right.
I'm bracing myself irrespective.
I am curious though, first to know, for people who own companies in areas that may not normally feel full of purpose, say a couple guys that own an insurance agency, but impact, almost 100 people within the organization. If what the organization does doesn't just innately scream, purpose, how can the leaders of those companies help the individuals there feel a sense of purpose and connectivity?
I will push back really, really hard on that. I believe every company that has any sales at all serves a purpose, because people don't buy things. They do not part with money for something that they believe is meaningless. Insurance, it's honestly interesting that you mention that exact example, because I will share a story about this. One time I was at a virtual networking group. And for those who are involved in networking groups, you know how they go. Everyone does a round robin, maybe 30 to 45 seconds explaining what they do for a living. And if they're part of some networking groups, they may give their tagline, and then you go on to the next person. And then usually after that round robin of commercials for the business, there is a spotlight presentation by one business. And at this particular meeting, the spotlight presentation was a woman who owned a company that provided insurance services to small businesses. And I was sitting exactly where I am right now. And I sat back in my chair and crossed my arms and sighed and prepared to be bored to tears, because I could not imagine in my wildest dreams anything less interesting than a 15, 20-minute presentation about insurance. But she stood up in front of that camera, got that mic out, and started to talk. She believed that her job as an insurance broker was the most important thing that there was. She believed in small business. She believed that there was nothing more beautiful than an entrepreneur finding their dream and their passion and struggling up the rocks of Mount Olympus to build that castle up in the sky. And she also believed that there were obstacles every step of the way that they had to face, and that her purpose in life was to give them the protection that they needed to be able to be resilient when those obstacles happened. And that's what insurance was. When she spoke, I felt her passion so much. It was like she had pulled an arrow out of some hole in the back on her back and thrown it right through the camera, through the screen, and into my heart. She was like a knight of the Templar protecting some holy relic. That passion was there. She found that purpose. So I would say and I, by the way, was riveted. That was more than a year ago. Here I am talking to y'all about it today. I can see it in my mind. The passion was there because there was a purpose. If you do not sell insurance and one of your clients suffers a catastrophe, their fate could be, in some cases, from their perspective, worse than death. People commit suicide because they don't have money to cover extraordinary events that occur in their life. And so I would say that it's very hard for me to imagine any company. I had a friend who told me, she was a lawyer, all I did my entire life was work on litigation between razor companies. There was no purpose. I told her that ain't true. There are men like me that are not that good looking. All the more so if we aren't shaved right and we have to go out into the world and present ourselves. If that razor is not good, I will not have job opportunities. People will look at my ugly face and go somewhere else. There's a purpose there. Purpose can be found anywhere. It's up to us to connect to it.
I love that answer. Yeah. I love that. And I feel re-energized that we have purpose too. Like
You do.
Little did I know how good we would be made felt by speaking to you today. Thank you for that. All right, let's jump into rapid fire.
If you ran for political office, your slogan would be,
The future is here. Let's make it happen.
What's the first thing you notice about somebody when you meet them?
Posture, body language.
name something you do when you need to be inspired.
Put on some disco.
What's the one thing you've always wanted to do, but that you have not yet done?
Bicycle ride through Japan.
Have you had a nickname, and what is it?
I won't give you all of my nicknames because then you'll know too much about me. But I will say that I dated someone in high school who called me Scooty. And I liked that because I did at that phase like to scoot around and be active and move and just generally fly and circle around in the world.
All right, Scooty, I think your professional superpower is obvious, but why don't you animate what you feel it is?
Why don't I animate? My name is Scott Mason, and I am here to excite you. I good enough.
Perfect.
All right, I could tell Phil put this one in. If you could eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would that be?
Hard shell tacos with spicy ground chicken and chorizo.
Ooh.
There you go.
Did you grow up with Spanish Gardens in Kansas, by the way?
No, but I want to say, did they have them maybe in Kansas City?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, it's the taco
sounds
sauce.
familiar.
When you said the hard shell tacos with the spicy, they're spice manufacturer and sauce manufacturer in Kansas City. It's amazing. It's one of the things I always get when I go back.
I'll have to remember that.
So what's next for Scott Mason? What's the future look like for you?
So I am working on some business projects that I will be having more discussions with folks about in the future, but that are taking the idea of connection to a different level. I really do believe that there is a need for a community that is based on connecting to each other for meaning. And I am working to begin to share some offerings related to that to folks that are following the podcast as well as on my social media so that we can actually begin to move that beyond just listening to a podcast and connecting with each other that way into something more concrete.
Oh, that's a good teaser for the next thing.
Yeah, why not tease a little?
You have an amazing story, coming from, as an adopted kid in the Midwest and biracial and African-American parents and, white neighborhood and all this, coming out through all this experience, right?
Yeah, it's kind of wacky.
And then just, becoming, so successful in everything that you've done and this idea of how you connect with people. And it's definitely a gift. Now, when you look back and reflect on that, what would you, say to your younger self?
When I would look up at the stars, dream about something that was different, I imagined this city where I would be. And I think I mentioned that earlier. I would tell that young kid that the city is there. It's waiting for him. And it's even more dazzling than he can imagine.
That's awesome.
I love it. So the show's called Discover the Difference. And I think Gabe might have just cited about 15 things in your history that make you different. But if somebody specifically was looking to hire you as a consultant for leadership series or just to encourage them to watch your podcast, what is it about you that makes you different and special?
I truly care. I truly care. I sometimes wish I didn't care that much, but I do. And so if you look, I could talk on and on about experience. I could talk on and on about some special 10-step technique, all of that sort of stuff. It doesn't matter. What matters is that my clients know that when they're with me, they have someone who truly cares.
That's awesome. Well, where can the audience find more about you or find you if they want to learn more?
The best place to go is purposehighway.com. There are connections to all of my social media accounts, as well as some other business and websites that I have there. And for now, we're building some additional pages that are going to be related to some of these forthcoming offerings that I'm talking to you about. But even those will ultimately be accessible through purposehighway.com. I want as many folks with me in the front seat as we race down that highway together.
Absolutely. I think there's something in it for everybody. Any last parting words for the audience, Scott?
It has been a privilege being on this show. I feel connected with you all. You all create that sense of connection. And I appreciate that you gave me the chance to express that. And I hope you feel that going forward too. I know the show is going to rock and it is going to succeed.
Thank you. You know, we feel very grateful that you're here and you took time to be with us. So we're very appreciative of that. Thanks, Scott.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're an inspiration, and we feel exactly the same way you do and look forward to connecting more with you in the future and getting the good word out about Scott Mason and everything that the future has in store.
And I exactly plan on doing the same.
All right, Scott, thanks so much. Have a great day.